My mother-in-law asked me to take out a loan in my name. Then she told everyone I stole from her. You know, I always thought I was a decent person. I mean, I tried to help people, especially family. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. But what difference does it make now, right? It all started 3 years ago when I married Jake. Great guy, calm, hardworking. We met at work, both of us at the same tech startup in Austin. He was a developer, I was a product manager. We had a small wedding, just close family and friends at a local vineyard. Then married life began. For the first 6 months, we rented a small apartment in South Austin. 1 bedroom, but affordable. We were saving for a down payment on a house. The housing market in Austin was insane. Even starter homes were going for $500,000. Then Jake's mom, Margaret, suggested we move in with her. She had this big 4-bedroom house in Westlake Hills, living alone since Jake's dad passed away. She said, "Why waste money on rent when you could live with me and save for your own place?" I was hesitant at first. Living with in-laws is tricky, but Jake convinced me. He said his mom was amazing, no drama, and we'd save a ton. Plus, Westlake Hills, that's prime real estate. Great neighborhood, excellent schools for when we have kids. So I agreed. The first few months were actually pretty good. Margaret was this refined woman, former high school English teacher at Westlake High. Always put together, dressed tastefully. Think Ann Taylor and Talbots. She tutored kids on the side to supplement her pension. She was an amazing cook, kept the house spotless. I'd come home from work and dinner would be ready, house sparkling. At first, I felt awkward and offered to help, but she'd wave me off. "You young people work so hard. I'm home all day anyway." But gradually, the little jabs started. I loaded the dishwasher wrong, bought the wrong brand of milk, didn't fold the towels the right way, all in this condescending tone. "Oh, honey, didn't I show you how to do this properly?" But around Jake, she was all sweetness and understanding. He'd come home tired. She'd immediately feed him, ask about his day. When I tried to talk about my work, she'd look at me like I was speaking Mandarin. I remember one time I came home early and decided to make dinner. Found this great recipe online, chicken piccata with roasted asparagus. Spent 2 hours in the kitchen, set the table nicely, even lit candles. Jake came home, was thrilled. Then Margaret walked in, sniffed, and said, "Oh, did something burn?" "Well, it's the thought that counts, dear. I made some meatloaf just in case." And she pulls out this perfect meatloaf from the fridge. Jake, of course, ate my chicken and praised it, but I saw him going back for seconds of his mom's meatloaf. Or there was the time I decided to do a deep clean on Saturday. Jake had to work overtime. They had a product launch coming up. So I got up early, vacuumed everywhere, mopped the floors, cleaned the windows. By noon, the whole house was gleaming. I sat down with some iced tea, feeling accomplished. Margaret comes in, looks around, and starts. "Katie, dear, why did you move the furniture? I had it arranged for optimal feng shui, and the windows, I use a special vinegar solution, not Windex." "Oh well, I'll fix it later." Jake didn't pick up on my hints, or didn't want to. "Mom, stop picking on Katie," he'd say, and she'd immediately respond, "Oh, I'm not picking, honey. I'm just trying to help. She's a sweet girl, but not everyone was taught these things growing up." And she'd give me this sympathetic look. My mom, by the way, is a cardiac surgeon at Methodist Hospital. raised me and my sister alone after my dad left. Speaking of my mom, Margaret met her at the wedding and instantly took a dislike to her. I think it was because Mom was straightforward, no pretense, but that seemed to bother Margaret. She liked to emphasize her refinement, her education, and Mom was just Mom. Direct, honest, what you see is what you get. I remember when Mom first visited us at Margaret's house, Margaret put on a whole show. She set the table with her best china, made place cards, even printed out menus in French. Mom looked at all this and said, "Margaret, this is lovely, but we're family. No need for all this formality." Margaret smiled tightly and replied, "Oh, but Linda, maintaining standards is so important, especially for the younger generation, don't you think?" After that visit, Mom pulled me aside. "Katie, honey, be careful. Something about that woman doesn't sit right with me." I brushed it off. "Mom, you're overthinking it. She's just particular about things." Anyway, I put up with these little digs for about 8 months. Then one evening, Margaret comes into our room looking serious. Jake and I were watching Netflix, enjoying a rare evening together. She sits on the edge of our bed and says we need to talk about something important. Turns out, she has this friend, Brenda, who's always dreamed of opening a small boutique. Handmade jewelry and artisan crafts. And now, the perfect storefront became available in the domain, really reasonable rent. But banks won't give loans to retirees, even if they have side income. And Brenda really needs this. She's been dreaming about it her whole life. I didn't get where this was going at first. Then Margaret says directly, "Katie, sweetheart, would you consider taking out a loan for Brenda? You have excellent credit, stable income. Brenda and I will make all the payments, don't worry. Banks just want to see a young borrower with W-2 income." I was taken aback. Taking out a loan for someone else's business seemed risky. On the other hand, we were living rent-free, saving tons of money, and saying no felt awkward. We're family now. I looked at Jake. He just shrugged. "Well, Mom, if you think it's necessary, Katie, what do you think?" Margaret jumped in. "Oh, don't worry, it's just temporary. 6 months to a year max until Brenda gets established. Then she'll either refinance or pay it off early. I'll handle all the paperwork. You just need to sign at the bank." Long story short, she convinced me. A week later, we went to Chase Bank. They approved the loan quickly, $50,000 for 3 years. The interest rate wasn't great, almost 18% APR, but Margaret assured me the interest wouldn't be an issue. Everything was calculated. I remember sitting in that bank office, signing papers, and feeling this knot in my stomach, like something was off. But then I looked at Jake, nodding encouragingly, and thought, well, they wouldn't screw over family. Plus, Margaret even offered to write up a promissory note, but I declined. Seemed too formal for family. The money hit my account. I withdrew it and gave it to Margaret. She hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You're such a blessing, Katie. Brenda will be so grateful." First 2 months, payments came in like clockwork. I even stopped thinking about the loan. Then problems started. First, a payment was a week late. Margaret apologized, said Brenda had supplier issues. Then another delay. Then the payment didn't come at all. I approached Margaret. "What's going on? The bank sent a second notice." She replied calmly, "Oh, honey, don't stress. Brenda's having temporary cash flow issues, but she promised to make double payments next month." But next month, things got worse. The bank started calling, First polite reminders, then more aggressive. And Margaret kept brushing it off. Why are you so anxious? It's just a couple of late payments. Business has ups and downs. I suggested visiting this boutique, talking to Brenda directly. Margaret kept deflecting. Oh, it's awkward. She's already stressed about the business. But I insisted. And guess what? The address Margaret gave me, there was no boutique. It was a Starbucks. I came home confused. Margaret, there's no store at that address, she answered calmly. Oh, silly me, I forgot to tell you. Brenda decided to start online first, then open a physical location. It's more modern, right? That's when I started getting suspicious. I asked more questions. What's the website? What's Brenda's last name? Do you have her number? Margaret had excuses for everything. The site was under construction. She couldn't remember the last name. Senior moments, dear? And she'd misplaced the phone number. Meanwhile, problems snowballed. The bank added late fees and penalties. The debt grew fast. Then collection agencies started calling. First polite, then increasingly aggressive. They called home, my cell, even my office. I remember my mom calling, worried. Katie, what's going on? Some collection agency called asking about you owing money. I had to tell her everything. Mom immediately offered to help financially, but she didn't have much. She'd been supporting my sister through medical school. And Jake? Jake took this weird, neutral stance. Well, what's done is done. We need to pay it back, he'd say. I'd tell him about the weird stuff with the store, and he'd respond, Mom knows what she's doing. Don't interfere. Maybe her friend really is having problems. Then came the moment I never expected. I came home early from work one day, heard Margaret on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, just walking past, and I heard, No, Susan, I had nothing to do with it. It's all my daughter-in-law. She took out a loan without telling us. Now she can't make payments and is making up stories. My jaw dropped. I stood in the hallway, not believing my ears. She continued. I asked her, Why do you need so much money? She said for the wedding. Well, I thought, young people, let them save. But turns out she spent it on something else. Now poor Jake has to deal with her mess. I couldn't take it anymore, burst into the kitchen. She quickly hung up, but I saw her go pale. Margaret, what are you saying? What wedding? You asked me to take out this loan. She looked at me calmly and said, Katie, what are you talking about? What loan? You did this all yourself, got the money yourself, and now that you can't pay, you're blaming others. I was stunned. What do you mean, myself? You asked for your friend, for Brenda. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. What Brenda? I don't have any friend named Brenda. You're confused, dear. My head was spinning. Was I going crazy? Or was she lying so skillfully? I ran to Jake in our room. He'd just gotten home. I told him everything I'd heard. He sat there, listened, then said, Katie, maybe you misunderstood. Mom couldn't have said that. That evening, we had a family meeting. The three of us sat at the dining table, and Margaret, with an innocent face, told her version. Katie came to me about 3 months ago, said she wanted to take out a loan for some personal needs. I advised against it. Why get into debt? But she insisted. Well, I thought, they're adults. They know what they're doing. I was shocked. How could someone lie so blatantly? But the worst part, Jake started doubting me. Katie, maybe you really did get confused. Stress, work, maybe you forgot. After that conversation, I realized I was in some parallel universe. The person who thanked me for help a month ago now pretended nothing happened. And my husband chose to believe his mother. But that was just the beginning. A week later, Jake's aunt called, Margaret's sister. We chatted about weather, health, then she carefully asked, "Katie, is it true you took out a big loan?" I said, "Yes, I did," at Margaret's request for her friend. She sounded surprised. "For a friend? Margaret told me you took it for your own needs and now can't pay it back." I tried to explain, tell her how it really was. But I felt the aunt didn't believe me. Of course, her own sister tells her one thing, and a daughter-in-law she barely knows tells her something completely different. Meanwhile, Margaret launched a real campaign. She told all the relatives, neighbors, her friends the heartbreaking story of how her young daughter-in-law got into debt and now tries to blame it on her mother-in-law. And the worst part, everyone believed her. Of course, a respectable woman, former teacher, everyone's respect. And who am I? A girl who joined the family a year ago. I particularly remember one incident. A neighbor came over, sweet elderly lady we sometimes said hi to in the driveway. She brought a casserole, said she made too much and wanted to share. Margaret welcomed her warmly, made coffee. Then the neighbor said, "Margaret, is it true you're having issues with your daughter-in-law?" Margaret sighed heavily. "Oh, Betty, you have no idea what we're going through," and started telling her version. I was sitting in the bedroom, hearing every word. How Margaret described my shopping addiction, how I throw money around, how she tried to talk sense into me. Betty was gasping, sympathizing, and when she was leaving, she looked at me with such judgment. Jake initially tried to stay neutral, but with each day, he grew more distant, stopped talking about anything beyond household matters. When I tried to bring it up, he'd brush me off. "I don't want to discuss this." Then he started sleeping on the couch in the living room. One time, I tried to have a serious talk with him, sat next to him on the couch, said, "Jake, do you really think I'm capable of this? We've been together over a year, you know me." He replied, "I thought I knew you, but now I'm not sure. Mom has never lied to me, and you? I don't know what to think." Those words cut like a knife. So a year of marriage means nothing? All our conversations, plans, dreams, erased by his mother's words? Meanwhile, problems kept mounting. The bank filed a lawsuit. I got served. I showed the papers to Margaret, thinking maybe this would snap her out of it. She looked at them and said, "Well, you'll have to face the consequences of your actions. Maybe court will teach you responsibility." Problems started at work too. HR called me in for a meeting. Turns out, collection agencies were calling there too, demanding I pay the debt. The company couldn't fire me for personal debts, but you understand, Katie, this creates an unhealthy atmosphere. Maybe you should take some time off, sort out your problems. Speaking of atmosphere, coworkers started treating me differently too. Once I overheard two colleagues talking. "Did you hear Katie has huge debts? Apparently she got involved in some scheme." "Really? She seemed so responsible." I tried to find this mysterious Brenda, called all of Margaret's friends I knew. Nobody had heard of her. Went to the address where the boutique was supposed to be. There's been a Starbucks there for years. Asked around. Nobody heard about plans to open a boutique. When I presented these facts to Margaret, she just smiled sadly. Katie, dear, you need to see a doctor. These are becoming obsessive thoughts. Maybe see a therapist. And Jake, standing next to her, nodding. Mom's right, you need help. That's when I broke. Started doubting my own sanity. What if I really imagined something? Maybe there was a conversation I misunderstood. Maybe I did take this money and forgot. But then I found text messages on my phone, screenshots of the first 2 payments. Sender, someone named Brenda Louise Patterson. I showed Jake, thinking, here's proof. He looked and said, so what? Maybe this is some friend of yours. Mom says you had friends who did MLM. Maybe you gave them money? That's when I realized it was hopeless. Whatever evidence I presented, however I tried to prove my case, everything would be twisted against me. Margaret had created such an image of me as a liar and fraud that any of my words were seen as attempts to wriggle out. Eventually, I packed my things and moved back to my mom's. Thankfully, she believed me from the start. I told you to be careful with that woman, Mom sighed, hugging me. Never mind, honey. We'll get through this. The main thing is you got away from them. We haven't filed for divorce yet, but we've been living separately for 6 months. Jake texts sometimes, asks how I'm doing, even suggested meeting, talking, but I'm not ready. And what's there to talk about? How he betrayed me, believing his mother over his wife. I'm dealing with the loan myself. Got a second job. Now, besides my main work, I do freelance consulting, managing projects remotely. I'm exhausted, but what choice do I have? I've already paid off more than half the debt. About $20,000 left, including interest and penalties. And recently, I learned something interesting. Remember that Susan, who Margaret was talking to on the phone? Turns out she's her longtime friend, whose son is getting married. And they're planning a huge wedding, 200 guests. At the Four Seasons, with limos, fireworks. Guess who's paying for most of it? Right, the loving future in-law, Margaret. I found out by accident. Ran into a former colleague of Jake's, we got talking. She mentioned, hey, did you hear your ex-mother-in-law is throwing such a wedding for her friend's son? They say she dropped over 50 grand. Where does a retiree get that kind of money? My blood ran cold. So my $50,000 went to someone else's wedding? And this refined woman is calmly watching me work 2 jobs to pay off the debt? By the way, an interesting detail. After I moved out, Margaret became even more active in spreading her version of events. Started posting vague things on Facebook about ungrateful youth and the importance of checking people before marriage. Her friends commented sympathetically, bashed millennials. My friend sent me a screenshot of one such post. Margaret wrote, "It's so important to look closely at people we let into our families. Sometimes behind a sweet smile hides a calculating heart. My son, unfortunately, learned this too late." The comments were priceless. "Stay strong, Margaret. We're with you." Poor Jake, how hard for him. That's why I always say you need to vet daughters-in-law. At first, I wanted to respond, tell my side, but then I thought, what's the point? Those who want to believe Margaret will believe her anyway. And the rest don't care. But now I know exactly the price of pretty words and fake refinement. And I know that no amount of savings is worth living with your husband's parents. Your own place, even if it's rented, even if it's small, that's freedom. Freedom to be yourself, live by your own rules, not worry constantly about loading the dishwasher correctly. You know, there's actually a silver lining to this story. I've become stronger, more independent. I stopped seeking approval from others, trying to please everyone. I learned to say no. And that's probably the most valuable lesson. Oh, and I changed jobs. Left that startup where Jake and I met. Too many memories, plus it was uncomfortable after all those calls from collection agencies. Now I work at a Fortune 500 company, salary is 50% higher, so I'll pay off the loan even ahead of schedule. Recently, Mom said something interesting. You know, honey, maybe it's all for the best. Look at yourself. You've grown so much professionally and personally this year. If you'd stayed with that mama's boy, you'd still be stuck in their toxic swamp. And you know what? She's right. I really have changed, become stronger, more confident, more independent. Yes, the price was high, but life is generally expensive, and its lessons are priceless. By the way, about lessons. After all this, I thought a lot about how people manipulate others. Margaret is a classic manipulator. She used a whole arsenal of techniques, from fake kindness and care to gaslighting. When the victim is convinced they're going crazy. You know what's most interesting? I started reading psychology books about manipulation and discovered that everything Margaret did is described in textbooks. First, creating dependency, free housing, help around the house. Then, gradual devaluation, small criticisms, unfavorable comparisons. And finally, the backstab when the victim is already emotionally drained. And Jake? Jake turned out to be classically codependent. Someone who lived under his mother's control all his life simply couldn't go against her, even when it came to his wife, especially when it came to his wife. Recently, I stumbled upon his Facebook profile. His status says, "Learning from my mistakes." I wonder which mistakes he means. Marrying me? Or letting his mother destroy our marriage? By the way, I've made new friends, met amazing people at my second job. They don't know about my lone story. I don't tell them. Why? It's my past, my experience, but they see me as a strong, determined person, and that feels good. I also started volunteering at a women's crisis center, helping women in difficult life situations. Many of them are victims of manipulation, psychological abuse. I understand them like no one else, and I can help, at least by listening, supporting. There I met a psychologist named Maria. She listened to my story and said, "You know, your mother-in-law is a typical narcissist. These people have a special mindset. They genuinely believe they're right, even when they're lying. For them, the main thing is maintaining the image of a perfect person in others' eyes. And if they need to destroy someone for that, they'll do it without hesitation." Maria explained that such people often choose kind, responsive people as victims. Those willing to help, who believe in the best in people. "You were the perfect target," she said. "Young, wanting to build good relationships with your husband's family, ready to compromise. She sensed that and used it." About the money, I decided to investigate where it went. Found that Brenda Louise Patterson, who made the first 2 payments. Turns out, she's Margaret's former colleague who moved to California years ago. I contacted her through LinkedIn. Brenda was shocked by my story. "What boutique? What crafts? I'm an accountant." Margaret asked me to make a couple of transfers from her account, said she was having issues with online banking. I just helped. Is there a problem? So that's how it was. Margaret just used her acquaintance's name to create the appearance of real payments. And then, when the scheme worked, she just stopped paying. I sent Jake screenshots of my correspondence with Brenda. He read them and silence. No response. Nothing. Apparently, even direct evidence can't shake his faith in his mother. And you know what's most striking? Recently, that same Susan, Margaret's friend, called me. Turns out her son's wedding went off lavishly, and now they're having financial problems. The newlyweds took out a mortgage, but don't have enough for the down payment. And Susan called me with, a request for help. Katie, she says, I know you and Margaret had some misunderstandings, but maybe you could lend us some money. Margaret says you're making good money now. At first, I thought I misheard, then thought it was some kind of prank. But no, she was serious. A woman who knows perfectly well that I'm paying off a loan taken for her son asks me to lend money. I calmly replied, Susan, I'm currently paying off a $50,000 loan I took at Margaret's request. That money went to your son's wedding. So sorry, I can't help. She hesitated. Oh, Katie, what are you saying? Margaret explained it was a misunderstanding. I interrupted. There's no misunderstanding. There's a loan agreement in my name and unpaid bills. Have a good day. After that call, I wondered, how many more such stories are there? How many people have suffered from this refined woman's manipulations? And how many more will suffer? I even wanted to file a police report for fraud. But the lawyer I consulted explained it would be nearly impossible to prove intent. She didn't forge your signature, didn't physically force you. You took the loan yourself, gave the money yourself. The fact that you were morally deceived, unfortunately, that's not a criminal offense. But now I know for sure, never, ever take out loans in your name for other people. Not even for relatives, especially for relatives. And always, always document all financial relationships. A promissory note isn't distrust, it's protection for both parties. Mom once said, good thing you and Jake didn't have kids. And I agree. I can imagine how Margaret would manipulate grandchildren. Scary to think. The most offensive thing? Most people still think I'm a fraud. Margaret tells her version so convincingly, with such details, that people believe her. And I'm tired of proving anything. Let them think what they want. Though not everyone thinks that way. Recently, I met Margaret's former neighbor, an elderly woman. She approached me at Whole Foods, took my hand, and quietly said, I believe you, dear. I've known Margaret a long time. She's had different stories before, but everyone stays quiet. She's such a respectable woman, it's awkward. Turns out, there were other cases. The neighbor told me how Margaret borrowed money from her for a friend's urgent surgery. The friend later turned out to be fictional, and the money was never returned. True, it was a small amount, about $5,000, so the neighbor didn't make a fuss. And her husband, the late Peter, God rest his soul, the neighbor added, spent his whole life paying off her debts. She was always getting into some scheme, selling cosmetics from catalogs, investing in pyramid schemes. Poor man worked until his death to cover her debts. What a revelation. So I'm not the first and, I'm afraid, not the last victim. And you know what I realized after all this? Evil doesn't always come with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it appears as a nice, refined lady who bakes apple pies and quotes Shakespeare. And the most dangerous manipulators aren't rude jerks, but exactly these cultured people who know how to charm, to win you over. Now I'm very careful with people. I haven't become cynical, no. But I've learned to see red flags. Too quick intimacy, attempts to make you feel guilty, complaints about everyone around. These are all signs of a potential manipulator. And another thing, if someone asks you for something but refuses to document it, run. Run immediately. Because honest people have nothing to hide. As for Jake, sometimes I feel sorry for him. He's still stuck in that toxic symbiosis with his mother, lives with her, obeys her in everything. Recently, mutual friends told me Margaret is already looking for a new bride for him. From a good family, with proper upbringing. I wonder if that girl will take out a loan for another of her mother-in-law's friends. And I'm moving on with my life, working, developing, building a new life. Yes, with debts. Yes, with a ruined reputation in certain circles, but free from illusions, from toxic relationships, from the need to meet someone's expectations. And you know what? I'm even grateful to fate for this lesson. Expensive, painful, but necessary. Now I know exactly who I am, what I want from life, and what kind of people I want to share it with. As for Margaret, well, everyone gets what they deserve. Maybe not right away, but they do. She's left with a son who will never become independent, with a reputation that will sooner or later be destroyed by her own schemes, and with karma, which, as we know, works flawlessly. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember my story. Don't be afraid to leave toxic relationships. Don't hesitate to defend your boundaries. And never, ever take out loans for other people's dreams. Because your life is your responsibility. And only you decide who to let into it and on what terms. Take care of yourself. And trust, but verify. Always verify.